Well, good morning. Welcome to Summit Drive Church. If we haven't met yet, my name is Dave. I'm our lead pastor here, and I'd love to connect with you at the door, even on your way out, if we haven't had a chance to say hi yet. But, many of my favorite moments have been set in the backdrop of a cool morning where mist lines the lake that I'm pushing a canoe into, or drapes over the long grasses of a field as I'm setting out on a crisp fall day, seeking game or just a heart full of peaceful quiet. Now, mist can be as mystical as the Misty Mountains in The Lord of the Rings. Yes, mysterious and beautiful and fleeting. Mist is a stock image in the Bible to talk about this transitory nature of things, including of human lives. Here for a time, as mysterious and beautiful as the mist on the morning that graces the ground, but as mist is burned off, evaporated by the heat of the morning, so our life is also fleeting. It was the quiet of a March day. I remember there was fresh snow on the ground outside, and on the branches. And there was a robin hopping around our window, no doubt hoping for the warmth of the sun to speed the move towards spring. We were gathered around my dad's bed as he moved from this life to the next. The writer of Ecclesiastes uses this word, hevel, mist, vapor, a breath, here and then gone. I know, I really do get it. In our culture, we are not very attracted to thinking about death, especially not very attracted to thinking about our own death, which has been a normal part for all of Christian history. We've even got lingo for it, the memento mori, remember your death. We're not very well rehearsed these days in the ars moriendi, the art of dying. We'd rather not go there or anywhere near there. But the ancient wisdom of remembering your death is not about being morbid. It's about learning to live well. It's about being honest about the limits and boundaries of human life, of this life, so that we can get on with living well in this life and be well prepared for death when it comes. Because last time I checked, the mortality rate for humans is still 100%. How you feeling so far? Everyone feeling good? That's not the way to start a message, hey? Now, one of the reasons I love the Christian faith is that it's real about the real things. It's honest, but it's also deeply hopeful. See, living well is living with a real awareness of our life's contingencies, the things that we're dependent on. The reality that we are not nearly the masters of our own destiny we'd like to believe we are. And this kind of arrogance, thinking I can control all things around me, that I'm really calling the shots, is what James addresses in our text today. Look what he says in our text. He says, "What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." He says it again, not to be morbid, but to address the sin of presumption, the sin of arrogance, to remind us that we are creatures dependent. We are creatures dependent on all things to God, which ironically is about the most freeing thing I could tell anybody, especially those who get stuck in that grinding wheel of believing that I have to make life work and that it all depends on me. How freeing to know that it doesn't. And you don't, actually. So we're going to hear this text together. The text I'll read, but then I'm going to add on one bonus verse. It doesn't belong exactly in this text, but it's really important for understanding this text. So would you pray with me as we open our Bibles and our hearts to the Lord? Living God, Father, Son, and Spirit, we ask that you would give us ears to hear everything that you have to say to us, and more, that you would give us your wisdom by your Spirit to be able to live it out. And we ask this for your glory and for our joy. Amen. If you have a Bible with you, I invite you to open to James chapter 4. We're going to read from 13 down to 5, verse 6, then bonus verse 7a. Okay? Here we go. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we'll live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ear of the Lord Almighty. You've lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgent. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who is not opposing you. Bonus verse. Be patient, then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. Our staff have joked every now and again about how certain passages become like spa passages, generally taken wildly out of context. And, they just make us feel really good about ourselves. It's the ones that you see embroidered on pillows, or, they're up on a, Christian bookstore wall somewhere. It's like you go to your grandma's place, and she's just finished another beautiful needlepoint pastel yellows and blues, and she holds it up and says, "What do you think? You've fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter." And I could take a nap on that. Or you grab a book from the bookshelf at the House of James, right? The Christian bookstore in Abbotsford. As you're pulling it down, you notice this beautiful stained shiplap sort of sign on the wall, and it's got some mid-2000s scrawl on it. And it catches your attention. It says, "Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that's coming on you." And it's marked down to $37.99. And so you're thinking about Christmas gifts for your in-laws. If you have a business idea that comes out of this, I get a cut. Intellectual property rights and all, right? This is not a spa passage. Not even a little. Which is vitally important, actually, for the way that we interpret it, if we're going to hear it rightly. So we need to ask, who is being addressed by this text? Is James writing these words to this group who are an oppressed and persecuted group who've been kicked out of Jerusalem because of their faith in Jesus? Is he writing to them? Notice, both sections, 4:13 to 17, and 5:1 to 6, both sections begin with this rather blunt little phrase. Now listen, you. Which is interesting because I went through it again this week. Every other passage, in at least one spot within every other passage of this whole little letter in James, has the language that's familial in it. Brothers and sisters. Sometimes it's even more tender. Beloved brothers and sisters. This text is different. Now listen. That's it. Why the switch in language? Now, although you could never accuse James of being particularly gentle in this text as a whole, well, maybe not gentle, but I would say it like this. This letter isn't overly tender in its tone, right? The whole thing. But this section, especially 5:1 to 6, is bleak. Sounds like the Hebrew prophets of the Old Testament, Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, those who are offering the oracles of woe to those they address. So this is not so much instruction as indictment. You might ask why. It's led scholars to ask, is James directly addressing followers of Jesus in this section, or is he describing the faithless approach of arrogant merchants and the fate of oppressive landowners, two of the main ways to grow rich in the ancient world, and today, if we're honest? And if that's so, and it seems by far the most likely to me, I can see this text working on at least two levels. On the one level, remember, these Christians that James writes to are being persecuted. They're losing land. They've been kicked out from where their homes are. They've lost economic stability, maybe being shunned by business contacts, being treated poorly, sometimes even violently. We've heard in this letter how James says to his audience, he says this, isn't it the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones dragging you into court? So on one level, this indictment of rich oppressors would bring comfort to this audience, to remind them that those who are mistreating them will be judged accordingly by the perfect judge. And this is also a call to those who are being tempted toward a revolutionary kickback, a response of taking up the swords themselves, of the zealot response. We talked about this last week, it was last week. Wow, a lot happens in a week. They're not to take matters into their own hands, but instead be patient, to trust God with their pain, wait for his justice. And that's why I included 5 verse 7, because there's a shift in the language here, right? Be patient then. Be patient, therefore, it could be translated. Be patient in light of all that is happening to you, brothers and sisters. There's that familial language again, until the Lord's coming. See that? Back to the brotherly, tender address. That's the one level of the text, bringing comfort. But there is another level to this text that we need to pay attention to as well. It is working in the prophetic mode. It's stating God's judgment on rich oppressors, but this doesn't mean that there's no instructions for followers of Jesus. There certainly are. Perhaps for those of us who are not in a position like the first audience, none of us are being persecuted for our faith. None of us are being marginalized like they were. So we need to hear it somewhat differently. We particularly need to ask where we find ourselves in this picture. Are we tending to act like the arrogant merchants described here? Are we at risk of becoming like the oppressive landowners? Those are valid questions, and they speak to us in particular. So this text, I think, becomes a dual-purpose kind of text, a comfort to the poor and oppressed, a warning to those with money and influence. And for those with money and influence, a call maybe to turn back to God before it's too late. So let's listen for God's voice through this text. First, the warning to arrogant merchants. Let me just read the first couple verses again. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go to this city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. And then James's response, why? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What's your life? You're a mist who appears for a little while, then vanishes. Let me read the next bit too. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we'll live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So what do we need to hear in this section? I think 3 things. Be humble, be human, and be where your feet are planted. First, be humble. The issue James points out here is essentially the sin of presumption. Right? There's an arrogance that says, hey, we're in control of our own destiny. It's a line of thinking that's really devoid of belief in God or God's providence. The fact that life is contingent on him. We just sang it, right? It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. There is no other source for your breath than him. So the fact of life is contingent on the kind and generous provision of our God. And even more for us today, we are inheritors of a very mechanistic view of the universe. That's kind of come over the last 300 years since what we often call like the scientific revolution, right? I have a science degree, so I'm not against science, but hear me. Most of us end up being fairly deistic in our day-to-day dealings. Now, deism was this idea that's like basically God is like this blind watchmaker who winds up a clock and then just has like a really long smoke break. And he's just kind of like letting things go. When it comes to our planning, we can then believe that, if there's formulas, we can presume on guaranteed outcomes. But this is not the biblical view, not least because God doesn't take smoke breaks. Remember, Jesus says in John's gospel, my Father's always working. So there's that. When Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that God our Father takes care of the sparrows, he actually does. There's this mysterious reality. Yes, God has set the world up to work in a certain way, which is why we can do science, right? You can guarantee at least, or you can make some really good inferences about the world. That's true. But that doesn't rule out that God is literally giving breath to that sparrow every moment and providing every moment for its needs. Both of those things can be true at the same time, right? He feeds them. It's all contingent on him. So the logic of James is simple. It's like, how arrogant can you be? You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. We can't presume on the future. And his evaluation is this: all such boasting in your arrogant schemes is evil. But then he does give an alternative. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we'll do this or that. Now, two things. First, to say if it is the Lord's will is not some kind of like magic formulation that you just have to say. It's not so much about what you're saying, it's about the attitude and heart behind it. Like, hey, son, I'm going to pick you up at Nature's Fair at 3:10 after school if it's the Lord's will. Or, you know what, I'm going to make that new chicken dish for dinner tonight, love, if it's the Lord's will. In fact, it could become just words. And in many cultures, it has, right? There's that Latin phrase, Deo volente, right? Lord willing. And people can just kind of like chuck it into sentences without ever thinking, oh, I'm actually depending on the Lord for this. So it can become just words very easily. Second thing, James isn't actually against planning. Planners got a plan. Man, dreamers got a dream. Make your SMART goals. Enroll in that university program. In fact, here's the second thing. The Bible encourages wise planning. And we're going to see that more as we step into the Proverbs this summer. So the humility described here isn't an attitude, or pardon me, it is an attitude. It's not a formula of speech. It's what we hear in Proverbs 27:1. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. If it's the Lord's will, then, is powerful because it keeps us in a place where we know that we're not in control of the outcomes. As we were talking about this text this week, Pastor Jill said that this should be like the theme verse up on the wall for any kids ministry program, anywhere, right? We make our plans, but wow, if we don't have to be flexible all the time. You make your plans, but as they say, it's in the Lord's hands now, right? So what about us? It's possible for us to live like God is just a minor footnote in this great story that we are curating for ourselves. I'll go to this school, do well, get a good job, marry Mr. or Mrs. Right, and they're beautiful, of course, and we'll have 3 beautiful children who are so compliant and easy. Actually, they eat everything and don't throw it on the floor at all. See? It's easy to be cross-pressured, as philosopher Charles Taylor puts it, to just buy into the norms of our culture and live like God is not the active agent, but we are. This kind of living, says James, is boasting. And this kind of boasting, says James, is evil. And we think, whoa, easy, James. That's some strong language there. And it is. Because in essence, to boast like that is to overspill the boundaries of what it means to be human. It's to presume on territory which belongs to God alone, which is our next point. Just be human. Again, note the logic of James. You are a mist. Why would he say that? He's saying, be aware of the limits of your humanity, including your mortality. Now, as uncomfortable as it may make us feel, James is right. You are a mist. I am a mist, a breath. And it's good to remember that if you're going to live well. Psalm 90, verse 12, puts it into a prayer form for us. It says this, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. That's what that phrase, memento mori, remember your death, is really getting at. It's about gaining a heart of wisdom. So when I remember the brevity of life, of my life, when I remember that I'm not promised tomorrow, it calls me to live this day, every moment, as well and as wisely as I can. It teaches me to take no moment for granted. The hug at the door before the kids rush off to school. The heart emoji in a text that's just about groceries to my wife. That opportunity to support a neighbor who's struggling. Followers of Jesus are reminded that my life, my days, belong to God. They're in His hands. Listen again to the arrogant merchants. Go to this city and make a profit. Now, nothing wrong with making a profit unless you've made the goal of your life making a profit, which sounds like the case, actually, for these arrogant merchants. This text reminds us that my life is not my own. It is not. My goal isn't to make my plans, write my story, and maybe God can be a minor footnote. My goal is to ask, what is God calling me to do with the days He's given me? How do I bring honor to Him? How do I love my neighbors? Of course, there's planning, there's house chores, there's feeding your kids and paying your rent or your mortgage. There's all of that, of course. But life is more than that. You and I are called to join God in His good mission in the world. And it may be in simple and basic ways, but that's what we're doing. There's this young lady, Jade, who is returning to India soon. We're going to give her a mug in the next service, but she came to mind because she's been an integral part of our community, even in the very short time she's been here. We and the whole TRU community have been impacted deeply by her ministry because she just wants to love God. She's seeking to bless and serve those around her. She understands what James is saying here. She's humble, she's human, and she's living right where her feet are planted. She's just fully present. To the time that she's had in Kamloops, she said, I'm going to go all in. God, what do you want me to do with what's right in front of me right here? Which is our next point here. This song that we sang at the beginning, prior to the service, by Porter's Gate called Centering Prayer. And it's so helpful, especially for, if there's anyone in the room, and I think there's like probably a large percentage of us who can just like be always living in the future. Like you're doing this thing right now, but you're thinking about like, oh, it could be better next year if we do it this way, right? Or you're like, well, yeah, you're just constantly in planning mode. You're running in a year ahead. Or for those who are particularly prone to living in the past, to dwelling on either way, it's the glory days or like, I can't believe how hurt I am because of the past. And you're just living there constantly in what was, not what is. It brings us back. And the prayer goes like this: I want to be where my feet are. I want to breathe the life around me. I want to listen as my heart beats right on time. I want to be where my feet are. See, part of the hubris, the pride, and the problem of living for the next thing is how James concludes. He says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. We often call this the sin of omission, right? Like it's easy to commit sins, right? You just do something that is wrong against God or against others or against yourself. So that's committing a sin. But then James speaks of, and we kind of talk about the sin of omission, like not doing the thing, the good thing that you know you need to do right in front of you. And it's actually a problem with living constantly in the future or constantly in the past and not in the present. Because right now, in the present, there are good things that God has for you to do. But you have to be present in the present to do them. So do that good thing God is calling you today. I want to be where my feet are. See, in the case of the arrogant merchants, They're working in a money-motivated way that's missing the good that God has for them right in front of them. And I've actually heard this logic among Christian people before, more often than I wish I have. And it goes like this: well, if I save and make lots of money now, then I can be wildly generous later in life. When I'm independently wealthy and personally very comfortable. And I hope you can hear it. This is the same as the schemes of the arrogant merchants. We need to hear him again. Like, what is your life? That would be my response to that. What is your life? You don't know what's even going to happen tomorrow. You think of that farmer who builds bigger barns for himself to make more and more and to have a place to store it. And the next day, he's taken out. And Jesus' conclusion is like, you've been greedy. You're not living for the good of the society around you right in the moment. You're just thinking about your future for yourself. So this is never an excuse, well, I'll be able to give more later, to not give deeply and generously right now. In fact, the best indication of how generous you'll be in the future is how generous you are right now. And I looked it up, and the research shows the more wealthy you become, the less generous you become. If your heart is set on wealth, it will continue to be set on wealth. If you learn to be generous now, then if you happen to get wealthy in the future, then you'll probably be generous in the future. The best indicator of your future is what you're doing right now. So don't step over the good God has called you to right now. Be generous, wildly generous with your finances to love those around you, with your time, with your talents, with your energy. Do the right thing and do it now. I think that's what James is telling us. And what about this final section, this indictment of the rich oppressors? I've called it the lifestyles of the rich and oppressive. Here we go. Let me just read that one more time. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that's coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. They're rusted. Does this sound a little bit like Jesus in Matthew chapter 6? You'd probably be hearing that echo, right? James is always just riffing on Jesus and mostly the Sermon on the Mount. He goes on, their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Bad idea. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You've fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You've condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. So what's the Christian community to do? We see it in the switch of language, right? Verse 7. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. Again, it seems like James is preserving the language of you rich people, not to describe a Christian audience, but as a category for those who have lived in defiance of God's ways, who are defrauding and abusing the poor for their own gain. So he's stating the reality of the coming judgment on those who remained like Pharaoh, stubborn and stubbornly committed to their evil. So what do we need to hear from this? Two things. Be patient and be just and generous. Be patient. The next section, James 5, 7 to 11, makes best sense of how the community of Jesus followers should respond to the rich oppressors described in this passage. Be patient. Like, keep trusting God for your vindication. Why? Because resurrection. Because Jesus was raised, and he is the lawgiver and judge, as we read last week. And because, as James will say next, the judge is standing at the door. 5:9. Because Jesus was raised and will reign forever, we know that all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, to quote Julian of Norwich. I recently had a conversation with someone from our church who has been just going through a really hard time financially, really struggling. And he asked me, he said, what's the benefit of following Jesus? And he was serious. He just wanted an answer. Like, he's looking around and he says, man, it looks like those who are doing their own thing, who are going their own way, are the ones who are prospering. They're getting wealthy. They seem so happy. Why follow Jesus? And we talked about a few really good reasons, I thought. But I just started with Psalm 73 because I wanted him to know that his complaint, his frustration, has actually been expressed by faithful people throughout the ages. And there's an answer to his question found here too. So I'm going to read big portions of Psalm 73 and just listen for the resonances with my friend and with our text. It begins like this: "Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They're free from common human burdens. They're not plagued by human ills." It almost seems like he's making them into superheroes, right? Like they're not subject to the same things I'm subject to. He goes on, "Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts come iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance, they threaten oppression. They say, 'How would God know? Does the Most High know anything?' This is what the wicked are like. Always free of care, they go on amassing wealth. Surely in vain I've kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence." That's what my friend was expressing. It's like, it feels like I'm doing this for no good reason. Surely in vain I'm trying to follow Jesus, but things are going bad for me right now, right? That's his expression. But then he goes like this: "When I tried to understand all this, like on my own, when I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God, till I got in God's presence. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you've placed them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly they're destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. They're like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, Lord, you will despise them as fantasies." Yes, God is just. And here's the benefit, even for those who are in really difficult circumstances. Listen, he says, "Yet I am always with you. You hold me by the right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you take me into your glory," or into glory. "Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My heart, or my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it's good to be near God. I've made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds." You see that? See how that ends? I've made the sovereign Lord my refuge. That's what James is inviting all of us to hear when he says to this community, "Be patient then." Like, you can trust our Lord. He is the judge, not you. He will vindicate innocent suffering, and he knows it well since Jesus, God the Son, has stepped into our innocent suffering on the cross. Here's the last thing: be just and generous. The "be patient" doesn't mean that there's never a cry for justice. This text itself is a cry for justice, right? It gives us warrant to join our voices and our prayers with those in need. In our current situation, it often feels like might makes right. And this text says no. This text tells us that God's world is still a moral world. It tells us that greed and injustice and hoarding wealth and violence is still wrong. So when you see it in the world, you can say, no, this isn't right. This isn't God's way. That's good news in itself. The fact that the world is a moral world. Yet it does also unmask those places where we might be tempted along the lines of greed as well. I think it warns us, don't fall prey to the temptation to emulate the oppressive rich. And among the best ways to do that, again, is just to be generous right now. Be humble, be human, be where your feet are. And it's not only to pray, of course that's needed, but also to raise concern. It's to live in ways that are just and generous. to order our business dealings with integrity and truthfulness, to recognize that our money isn't actually ours ultimately, but it's what God has entrusted us to invest for his glory. And this is really good news. It's good news for the poor because it means that despite what looks like all evidence to the contrary, God has not forgotten you if you find yourself in that space. God is still for you even in your most desperate times. It's good news because it assures us that all those who gain riches by oppressing others will be held to account by a God who is just, the God of justice. It means that we can let go any need to avenge. Yes, your life is a mist, but Jesus was raised. And if you are in him, if you are trusting him, you will be raised as well. Yes, your life is fleeting because that's a part of the curse. But because death is not the end, as Paul says it, even your work now is full of meaning. Because this is the only life you get to live on this side of eternity, it matters what you do with your time, with your days. I'm going to invite the worship team to come forward. There's this High Valley song. Some of you listen to country music, some of you don't. I don't care either way. I like all music, if it's not awful. And this one's not awful. Before they were well known, they had a song, and it goes like this. The chorus asks a question, says this: if the last thing you did was the last thing you do, if the last breath you breathed was the last breath you drew, would you be okay with the way they remembered you if the last thing you did was the last thing you do? And if your answer is no, I wouldn't be okay with it, then let your next breath be about making it right. That's memento mori. Remember your death. Why? So that you can make it right now. So that you can live well right now. Remember you're a mist. As one thinker puts it, most of us spend our days building resume virtues, right? Those things that make us look good to a certain group in front of us right now. Those things that can, be a benefit socially or financially. But the things that really matter in the scope of your life are not the resume virtues, but the eulogy virtues, right? The things that people are going to say about you at your funeral. When they stand up here on the stage and you're down there, I want people to not have to get creative to say something nice about me, right? Or of substance. I want there to be eulogy virtues. Not just then, but now. You cultivate the eulogy virtues now. So remember your death. Remember that your life is a mist, and ask, are you living in a way that accepts each day as a simple gift from God? Just ask yourself that right now. Ask yourself this other question. If you would die tomorrow, what would you regret? Are the things that you wish were different than they are currently? Or another question, what have you left undone that God has called you to do? The good you ought to do, but you haven't done it yet. There's more good news, and this is it. The good news is this: if you have breath to answer those questions, you have breath to ask God to help you do it. So pray, and then do it. So I'm going to invite you to stand, and we're going to pray, and we're going to sing. And I'm going to invite you to keep praying into whatever those things are that God is bringing to mind for you in this moment.